Hey everybody, it's Joe with the How To Guys, and today I'm going to show you how to replace the cooling fan sensor switch on a 1980 GL1100 Goldwing. So let's get started.
So the reason I knew I needed to do this fix was that normally I sit down at about a quarter on my temp gauge, and I've been creeping up, and now I was up at about 3/4 and nearing the red when I was at stops in traffic. So I started by taking off the horn on the right side of the Goldwing, just unbolting it and flipping it out of the way. You don't need to disconnect the horn, because what we need to get at is that plug you can see down in there, which is covering the temperature sending unit, and that is mounted into the thermostat housing. So I just used a pliers and a flathead screwdriver to kind of ease off that plug. And once I got it undone, I wanted to check and make sure that the sensor switch was actually the problem. So I popped my key in the bike and shorted this switch, and you can hear that the fan turns on. And that shows that a fuse isn't blown and the fan's working, everything's working. It's got to be a problem either with this plug's connection to the sensor or the sensor. So I took a Q-tip and some electrical contact spray, cleaned out that plug. That didn't solve the problem, so I undid the negative to the battery because I was going to have to take apart the bike a little bit and mess around with that sensor switch. In order to do that, we're going to have to drain the coolant, so I unbolted the two bolts that hold the seat in and took the seat off to reveal two of the bolts for the false tank, and then you have these other two side bolts. So we removed the seat, and then you got to take the false tank off to get at the coolant reservoir and the top cap for the radiator, because we're going to drain the coolant. So removing that false tank, and then going down, you can see here is the bolt we need to unscrew to drain the coolant. But before doing that, I pinch the line to the extra reservoir that goes into the radiator, and then I also leave the radiator cap screwed on, so that as you're unscrewing that bolt at the bottom of the coolant system, it doesn't really start draining until you open that top radiator cap. Then you're going to need to grab a 27mm deep socket to get that temperature sending unit, that fan sensor switch, actually out of the thermostat housing. It can be tricky to reach way in there, but just unscrew it, and no coolant should really be left in there to get everywhere. And then I wanted to test my switch before replacing it, just to make sure that it was the problem. So I have the old one on the left and the new one on the right, and I rigged up this little system to suspend them in boiling water. And as the temperature is increasing, you got a little thermometer over there, you can see that when my voltmeter is set to ohms, the one on the right, the new one, showed a reading, the circuit was completed, but this one, the old one, it's showing 0. So the switch isn't engaging at high temperature, and I boiled this. I took the temperature up. I even let it touch the bottom of the pan to really ensure that even over 200, the switch wasn't engaging. But we know that one on the right, since it showed numbers on the ohm setting, that it's working. So I went ahead and popped the new one in to the thermostat housing, and I started it by hand so that I knew that it was seated correctly, and then finished it off with the deep socket, but I didn't crank on it really hard. There's no reason to mess up the threads. It just needs to hold the coolant in and be sealed. So then I took the plug and reconnected that. It can be a little bit tricky. This is really the last tricky part of the project. Take note of the orientation of the sensor switch so that you know what angle to have the plug at, and then push it on and make sure that it's tight. Then it's just a matter of filling the radiator back up with coolant and unclipping the line to the extra reservoir, putting the horn back on the right side, screwing that on, and then putting the false tank back on and screwing on the 4 bolts associated with that, followed by putting the seat back on, reconnecting the battery, putting the side panel back on, and then you get the joy of hopping on the bike and making sure you did it right. Good luck and thanks for watching.